I think most reasonable people would probably agree that we are living through some dark times right now in this country under this new administration. Things are so dark, in fact, that I normally categorize it as an authoritarian takeover or maybe even a fascist coup. And I think one of the more alarming things that we have seen is all of these wealthy individuals and business moguls, many of them have just kind of capitulated to the Trump administration. They're basically saying, bring on the oligarchy, baby. That's why we're seeing people like Jeff Bezos, who at one time at least seemed to be a good steward of the Washington Post, kind of kept his hands off of everything, but he's just taken a complete 180 on that. And now he is issuing guidance for the editorial board at the Washington Post. And I think that this is just another example of this oligarchy coming to form. This is another example of how these wealthy assholes are just bending the knee to Donald Trump. So let's go ahead and take a look at exactly what Mr. Bezos had to say here. I'm writing to let you know about a change coming to our opinion pages. We are going to be writing every day in support and defense of two pillars: personal liberties and free markets. We'll cover other topics too, of course, but viewpoints opposing those pillars will be left to be published by others. There was a time when a newspaper, especially one that was a local monopoly, might have seen it as a service to bring to readers' doorstep every morning a broad-based opinion section that sought to cover all views. Today, the internet does that job. He goes on to say that I offered David Shipley, whom I greatly admire, the opportunity to lead this new chapter. I suggested to him that if the answer wasn't a hell yes, then it had to be a no. After careful consideration, David decided to step away. So can anybody tell me what it means, what these two pillars mean, personal freedom and free markets? Does that cover women who are dying because they can't get access to the abortion care that they need? Does that cover all the trans people that are being persecuted by this Trump administration? Do those things fall into these two pillars? And why is it that Jeff Bezos didn't want to elaborate on what exactly that meant? Why does it sound like he's just kind of virtue signaling to the Trump administration? And I thought it was really interesting because a former executive editor at the Washington Post came out and said this.
Here's what he said to the Daily Beast today. He said, "There is no doubt in my mind that he is doing this out of fear of the consequences for his other business interests, Amazon, the source of his wealth, and Blue Origin, which represents his lifelong passion for space exploration. He has prioritized those commercial interests over the Post, and he is betraying the Post's long-standing principles to do so."
Yeah, that's pretty damning. It's pretty believable, if you ask me. I mean, I haven't been provided any evidence to the contrary that Jeff Bezos is actually looking out for journalistic integrity and free speech and all of these things. But I do know, ever since Donald Trump was elected, him and people like him have just been kind of falling in line, trying to do whatever they can to ingratiate themselves with the new dear leader. Because Jeff Bezos seems to be okay with this oligarchy. He wants to make sure that his fortune in Amazon and his space exploration with Blue Origin are untouched by this administration. I mean, it seems like a pretty reasonable explanation to me. And until I'm provided any evidence to the contrary, I think this is where I lean. And they were recently discussing this on CNN, and Jeff Jarvis came out and just called this stuff out for exactly what it is. These are all just vacuous words to appease Donald Trump. And if you guys do appreciate my work, please do remember to subscribe.
It's a ridiculous word game that's going on here. I mean, who doesn't believe in individual liberties? Who doesn't believe in free markets? Until a month ago, we lived in a democracy and capitalist country. Now we're in an oligarchy and a plutocracy, and things have changed. So for him to say that this is all about individual liberty and free markets is rather like being fair and balanced, if you remember that phrase from another network. It's meaningless. It's vacuous. It means absolutely nothing. Who's going to be against those things? So clearly he's signaling that he's going to use these kinds of made-up words to say, I'm with Trump. And as you said, it's his paper. He owns it. He can drive it in the ground, which he's doing, having lost 300,000 subscribers after not endorsing Kamala Harris. It's his choice, but it's an important institution in this country that he's destroying.
Yeah, I agree here. This is his choice, ultimately. He does own the paper, and this is just another business that he can do with what he wants. But he is destroying the integrity and the respect of the Washington Post. And using these vacuous words like personal liberties and free markets is a good way to kind of virtue signal to the Trump administration, because this Trump administration likes to go around and they virtue signal themselves on personal liberties and free markets. So this is a way for Jeff Bezos to signal that, hey buddy, I'm on your side. So if you can just leave Amazon and Blue Origin alone, I'm here for you. We'll make sure that no opposing views will be published on my paper. I mean, this is just absolutely grotesque. It is not okay for a billionaire owner to put his thumb on the scale at a respected institution like the Washington Post. This would have never crossed anybody's mind before. And like I said, at least he appeared to be a good steward. But over the past year or so, we have seen some wild changes, which just makes the argument for this oligarchy coming into form. And then you have Scott Jennings, the biggest, smuggest prick on CNN. Of course, he comes out and defends this.
Well, I'm interested in a couple of the comments you made. You said it was destroying the newspaper because they failed to endorse Kamala Harris. I mean, what does that say about a newspaper that you have to endorse a certain political party and for it?
That's not the way it happened. What happened was that the editorial board had an editorial done and ready, and that was the process.
Right.
And then suddenly to say, oh, now we're not going to endorse. They've endorsed other things since. It was the process by which it went under there. And there's other things going on constantly in the paper. I now use the hashtags Broken Times and Broken Post. The headlines in both papers, I think, are constantly off, constantly trying to soft pedal what's going on. Yeah. You're not going to like what I'm saying next, but we are in the middle of a totalitarian fascist coup in this country. Yes. And when we don't call it that, when we soft pedal it, when we don't have a real discussion about it. At least here, I could say those words. We can have that discussion, but you will not see those words in the New York Times or the Washington Post.
So, Jeff, if we were being honest, there should be a breaking news banner on CNN and MSNBC all day long. Yes. We are in dictatorship right now.
So do you guys think Scott Jennings is just dumb, or he's just kind of playing a character? He's playing the heel. Because people weren't pissed off because a certain political party wasn't endorsed. People were pissed off with how it was done. When you had somebody like Trump, who is a clear threat to the democracy, and now that he has been elected, he is proving as such. But you had the editorial board at the Washington Post who had already made their decision, who they were going to endorse, why they were going to endorse. And then you had somebody come in and say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore, which just takes away the integrity of the editorial board. That is why people were pissed. That is why people mass unsubscribed from the Washington Post, because they understood that somebody was putting their thumb on the scale. And when it comes to journalism, that is just not okay. You need to give your journalists, your editorial board, the freedom to report what they see, and if they are going to endorse a particular candidate, why is it okay for the billionaire owner to step in and say, I don't want to do that? That is why people were upset. And for Scott Jennings to just play dumb like it's somehow about endorsing a political party is just foolish. They then go on to discuss, and, Scott Jennings, I don't think he's ever met a argument from the Trump administration that he will not defend, but Jeff Jarvis rightfully calls him out here, that it's not the Trump administration that is actually standing up for free speech.
One more thing. You said, who would be against individual liberties? It has not been that many years ago in this country when a great many public officials, elected and unelected, were adamantly opposed to individual liberties. It must be defended all the time, including the most important one, free speech, which you and I must agree on has to be defended at all times.
Well, right now we see that Donald Trump is kicking the Associated Press out of the press room. And by the way, the rest of the press is not standing up.
They're not out of the press room.
That's not about...
They have a seat in the briefing room.
That's not about free press. That's about being afraid of what they're going to say, afraid of what they're going to do.
He's the most open, honest president.
It is so not.
Ridiculous.
That's ridiculous.
Look at what we experienced the last 4 years.
Are you kidding? This whole, notion of we're going to choose who we answer questions from, that is
He's frightened.
As in the
He's
White
frightened
House,
to death of free
the White
speech.
House is going to choose who they're going to answer questions to. This attack on the journalism and freedom of speech, like that is the last bit of our democracy to uphold. And quite frankly, the fact that a billionaire is controlling how our media is going to cover this president when we understand...
Who's controlling? Elon's controlling the media?
Elon, well, he has social media, but the billionaire Jeff Bezos.
How many radio stations does George Soros own?
Is George Soros going into those radio stations and saying, well, you can cover these two pillars, but anything opposing that, well, you can't touch those topics? Is George Soros doing that type of manipulation at his radio station, Scott Jennings? Is that what's happening? No, that is not what's happening. And this is not the Trump administration. The Trump administration is not the one protecting free speech. We have seen the AP getting kicked out of the Oval Office because they wouldn't use the correct terminology that Donald Trump wanted them to use. We just learned that Trump is going to be selecting who is going to be in the press pool. Absolutely grotesque and disgusting, instead of leaving it to the nonpartisan organization that normally establishes those things. Donald Trump has been one of the most anti-free speech presidents that our country has seen in quite some time. He's going around to different news agencies, collecting millions upon millions of dollars because he doesn't like the way that a video of Kamala Harris was edited. He's going around and suing Mark Zuckerberg on First Amendment grounds because he got banned from Facebook after inciting a violent insurrection against the United States. And I don't know if you guys caught it there, but Jeff Jarvis said Donald Trump is terrified of free speech. And that is exactly right. Because any free speech could be damaging to somebody who fancies himself as a king like Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to be a king, and that's why he is interested in squashing dissent. That's why we are seeing these actions straight out of the Trump White House. And for the Washington Post to now be caught up in all of this as this oligarchy forms in our country is quite disgusting. All of these wealthy assholes and these business moguls are just falling in line. So Daddy Trump will just leave them alone instead of standing up for the values that makes this country great. It is quite absurd, and until I'm presented with any evidence to the contrary that Jeff Bezos is not just looking out for his own behind with this new Trump administration, this is where my opinion stays. All of his actions up until now have kind of showed us that he's interested in appeasing Donald Trump to save his own ass. So I will leave it there for now. If you guys got anything out of this video, please do remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. We've got to build something here on the left that can adequately push back against this right-wing media ecosystem that just shovels shit for Donald Trump every single day. So if you do like what I do here, please do remember to subscribe. If you want to see how Donald Trump's polling is falling off of a cliff as he becomes the most unpopular president since presidential polling has been done, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.